Welcome back to Practice Underwater, presented by Share Practices. I am your host, Matt Garino. I'm here with Alex Sharp. Welcome.
Thanks, Matt. How are you doing?
I'm doing just fine. We have kind of an antithetical. What's the word? Is
That's
that
a good
right?
word for it. Great word for it.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm definitely not saying that right,
That was a
but
Tyler Tolbert word, man.
I've been trying to brush up. I've been hanging out with you and Tyler, and gosh, the vocabulary is overwhelming. But anyways, this is a practice where the doc is actually doing his own hygiene. He's 4 months into ownership, and he's still doing the Cavitron 1 hour appointments. So not something we typically deal with, but I think there's a lot of good stuff
No,
to get into.
it shows a lot of some of the commonly experienced but not commonly talked about issues that can come with practice transitions. It's easy to assume that all transitions are going to go off without a hitch. The seller is going to ride off into the sunset. We're going to keep the existing team members, but it doesn't always go that way. And so this is a great exercise in mindset, persevering through those types of contingencies. And Brandon does a really admirable job of seeing the forest through the trees in spite of how difficult of a hand he's been dealt.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who went through not quite a devastating transition as this one, I can attest it doesn't always go according to plan, especially when you're dealing with humans you're meeting for the first time who may be used to a different boss and a different situation. To give away a spoiler, his hygienist quits right as he closes on the office, which in today's climate of finding a hygienist, that's extremely tough, and he only had one. So we won't give away any other spoilers. We'll kick it to Suzanne as we get into part one of the interview with Suzanne and Brandon.
Welcome to this week's episode of Practice Underwater. Today, my guest is Brandon. Brandon is, I was going to say real doctor, fake name, all of that stuff, which I switched up a little today. So, by the way, I think what I need to say first and foremost is we never have fake doctors on the show, okay? They are all real. So, it's our real doctor whose fake name today is Brandon. I just had to throw this out there. Okay, so Brandon, welcome to Practice Underwater.
Well, thank you. Good to be here.
Awesome. Well, why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners and tell us about your practice?
So I graduated dental school in 2019. I went through a couple of different associateships, and then around the time of last March, decided that I wanted to be a practice owner. The area that my wife and I were living in was not exactly where we wanted to be long-term to raise a family and everything. So we kind of narrowed the search down to a pretty specific area that we were looking at. And I did a whole send out letters, and I had a few responses, and I chose a smaller practice that's in an area that's growing pretty well. And the practice had collections of about $500,000 since 2017 over the 3 or 4 years. And I just recently purchased the practice in January and have been in the practice for about 4 months now.
Congratulations. This is a 2021 recent purchase.
Yes, correct.
Super. Okay. So what have you discovered about practice ownership so far?
So far, the staffing of my practice has been the biggest issue that I found whenever I bought the practice. The hygienist that was there with us, she was no longer, she quit whenever I took over the practice. She was commuting about an hour away. And all in all, it's been pretty stressful so far with how everything's kind of gone, and a whole lot more work than an associateship. But at the same time, glad that I've made the jump into it and can see the benefits that will pay out over the long run anyways.
Mm-hmm. So let's just reiterate this. So you purchased the practice shortly after the hygienist left. The hygienist left at the same time as the seller retired. Was that kind of the story?
Exactly. Yeah. There was never a hygienist there while I was there. So since I've been there anyways.
Okay. And so now you're doing your own hygiene, it sounds like.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. Has it been difficult to find a hygienist in your area, or did you just decide I'm looking for the right person?
It's been very difficult. I had an ad out for about 6 to 8 weeks, and I got 2 responses. And I did end up hiring one, but she's a new grad, so she can start hopefully in the next couple of weeks anyways.
So she's a new grad waiting on her license then, huh?
Exactly. Yep.
Okay. All right. So the challenge here has been, in your opinion, doing your own hygiene, trying to fit everybody in. Tell us more about that story.
Yeah, so what's really gone on is whenever I got there, there was the previous doctor had pretty much stopped doing any diagnosing on patients, and there was no treatment on the books to do. And I was left with basically a full hygiene schedule that the original hygienist was seeing. So I kind of just stepped into the role of being a hygienist, and there was really no doctor production for roughly the first month of the practice. And then since then, I basically opened up a fourth day because the practice is only open 3 days a week historically. And I opened up a fourth day just to get treatment time in as a so we basically reserve Thursdays for strictly treatment. And I've been doing a whole lot of hygiene and limited treatment with just the availability that I have had so far.
Okay. So, and operatories? How many ops do
Uh,
you have?
4 ops. 2 are set up for hygiene, 2 are set up for treatment.
Okay. So currently, and you're still doing these Thursdays? So you
Yes. Yep.
basically 3.5 doctor days, right?
Pretty much. Yep.
Okay. How much of that time is spent now that you're almost at that 6-month mark coming up or 5-month mark?
Mm-hmm.
How much of your day is spent doing hygiene at this point?
Right now, recently, I would say probably about 60 to 70% of my time is spent doing hygiene. And I have basically my assistant situation is I only have a part-time assistant also. So she's not there one of the days of the week. So I am there with just the front desk and I'm doing all hygiene that day is basically what it boils down to.
Okay, so you have it scheduled on a day where you don't have an assistant. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, correct. Yep.
Okay. But everything you're talking about now is kind of a temporary thing, right?
Yep.
I mean, so you hired a hygienist.
Yes.
We're waiting for her license.
Yep.
And she's going to be working in your practice how many days?
We're going to do full time, the full 4 days.
Ah, yeehaw. I love it. Okay. So the challenging part you've described is back office. Tell me a little bit about front office now.
So front office is I have a long-term front desk person. She's been in the dental industry for like 20 years, and she's pretty much taken over. She pretty much takes care of the whole entire front desk or front office area. And on days that I'm there by myself, she'll help me turn over rooms and things of that nature. But she's definitely pretty well versed in everything that's front desk related. She knows all the patients pretty well, so she's helped with the transition a whole bunch.
Mm-hmm. So, what do you see the plan there being as you add hygiene?
Originally, since she was already there with just having she was there originally with a hygienist and the doctor. So I don't plan on changing much at the front desk as of right now, anyways.
Okay. She just won't be doing assisting anymore, sounds
Exactly.
like, or
Yeah.
turning over rooms.
Yeah,
Okay.
she'll have more time because she won't be helping me in the back on days that I was there by myself.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We jumped into pretty quick all the challenges, and I think it's important to consider wins as well. So you said almost 5 months into this. What do you consider a win since becoming an owner? Like I want you to think about 1 or 2 items that you say, you know what, I got to pat myself on the back for this.
Well, so far I've been really happy with basically how all of the patients have kind of responded to the transition because many of them were with a doctor for 20 or 30 years, and many people have come in kind of questioning having the new doctor be with them, and they've all expressed pretty good. They've all been pretty happy with how the transitions happened, with the team being the same and basically continuing the care that the previous doctor was there with them, and the transition, keeping a whole lot of the patients that were at least local, because obviously some people were moving from pretty far away or coming from pretty far away, but it seems like the attrition hasn't been all that bad for what a lot of people say with a new office or a new doctor coming in has been. So,
Okay, awesome. The front office team member is asking everybody that's giving compliments, she's asking them all for a review, right?
we implemented Swell last month. So, and that's been a whole lot of help too.
Okay, awesome. That's the answer I wanted to hear.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, so schedule wise, you said 3.5 days. What are we talking about in terms of hours per week? Like how many patient hours do you offer?
So we are there from 8 to 5 Monday, Tuesdays, and Thursdays right now, and then Wednesdays we're there from 7 to 3. Is what it kind of is what it is.
So it's almost 4
Yeah,
days.
pretty much 4 days.
Yeah. Okay.
The Thursdays are pretty light because, like I said, that was kind of the last minute that we added in. So that's been the last thing to fill up, but it's getting more full anyways.
Mm-hmm. So as you're seeing hygiene patients now, either they're kind of sporadically spread throughout the week, or you're seeing them on that one particular day.
Mm-hmm.
What are you doing to make sure that they're not scheduled back in your chair as a next appointment?
Okay, so as far as for the hygiene, we still have been booking the chairs as though they're hygiene and doctor chairs. So if it's a hygiene appointment, it's been going in one of the hygiene rooms. So whenever they get rebooked coming in 6 months, they're already on the side for the hygienist.
Okay, great. And whether it's chairs or ops, I guess I should have clarified. The question I was really asking was, how are you getting them out of your schedule and into somebody else's schedule? As you're seeing them going forward, you are then making sure they're scheduled in the future in a spot where a hygienist is going to see them and
Right.
not on your schedule, basically.
Yes. Yeah. That's how we've been doing it. And I've been having, even though I know it's not the most efficient way, but with my time being kind of limited in the office, the front desk has been doing most of the appointment scheduling right now. And whenever the hygienist does come in, she'll start making her own appointments as far as recalls are concerned.
Well, here's another win for you to chalk up. I want to give you kudos where kudos are due. And in the area of appointing ahead, um, this may be a little bit of a non conventional way you're doing it, but it looks like you're building value for that next appointment and making sure that the existing patients, anyway, anybody that you're seeing for a hygiene visit on your side is being appointed ahead. And when I look at dental intel, I see that being done at about a level of 93% for the
Okay.
last like 2 months. Historically, wasn't the seller wasn't necessarily doing a bad job in that area. It was closer to anywhere between 70 and 80%. So I think chalk that up as a win.
Okay.
That's definitely, you guys are paying attention to that. And so I would encourage you to also make sure that that's something that you instill in the hygienist, right? As she's
Right.
now a new grad coming into an office, her first experience, maybe not fully aware of what appointing ahead really means. You have a great momentum there. I would definitely keep it going.
Yeah, that's one thing that I've tried to make sure that everybody that does leave the office, I will basically what I do is I walk them up front to the front desk and then hand them off to her so that she can finish up the appointment and discuss any treatment that's needed that furthermore than what I already did in the operatory, and then also reappoint them for at least a hygiene visit and possible future treatment also.
Mm-hmm. As those things change and patients get used to, a different method, basically, working with your new hygienist on that handoff.
Mm-hmm.
Once everything's been scheduled in the back and appointing ahead, uh, chair side, and then handing off will be important. So I think you've got a good MO going, but that doesn't mean it's not a good idea to also alter that
Right.
once you have a hygienist in place.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let's talk numbers wise a little bit now. If we shift gears to what was the seller doing and, what you're doing. And
Okay. So you want to know what
so,
the seller did in the
yep.
past?
Tell me, historically what the seller has done and what you've been doing over
Okay.
the last few months.
Okay. So the seller was doing, remembering from the numbers whenever I bought the practice, he was doing about 500,000 in 2017 and 2018, and then in 2019, I think it dipped a little bit to about 450,000 over the entire year. And then so far, whenever I first started, like I mentioned, there was mainly hygiene that I was doing. So the end of January, beginning of February, or the whole month of February was not a great month for me in particular. But looking at the numbers lately, according to Dentrix anyways, it says I've been doing about 36 to 38,000 a month since March anyways.
So you're almost at what the seller was doing
Yeah.
if we're taking his 2019
Mhm.
average of about 40 a month.
Yep.
Okay. So this dip is definitely as a result of a loss in
Of
a
staff members.
producer,
Yeah.
of a producer for sure.
Mhm.
So question now is, what's your goal in terms of production?
So ideally, I would like to get. I mean, the first goal is obviously to get it to. Well, not obviously, but the first goal is to get it to be $1 million office. Is the initial goal. Is what I'd like to see it producing, and then kind of build from there. Is what I'd like to see.
Have you put some thought into what concrete actions get you to double the practice?
Initially, what I'm going to be doing is getting the hygienist in there will help a lot, just because that'll basically double the amount of patients that I can see in a day so far. And then ideally, because with how the schedule is now, she'll be walking into almost a full hygiene schedule, and we're doing okay with new patient numbers. I haven't even started doing any marketing at all, since I have no place to put them in my schedule. And I plan to start doing some marketing in June and July whenever the hygienist is finally licensed and able to be there a little bit more with me. I plan to also, once her schedule is completely booked out and we're booking further in for new patients than I would like to see, then adding another hygienist and also another assistant also.
We'll talk more about this on next week's episode as well when we get into the how-tos. But just as an aside here, I would say waiting to market the practice when we get to that point just will prolong your new patient flow. And if you're wanting to recognize the revenue and now kind of fill your schedule, I would say even if the hygienist is fully booked and you've got some spots in your schedule, it's okay to be seeing the new patients sooner rather than later.
Right.
So I wouldn't wait for you to start marketing the practice. I would say let's get on it sooner rather than later, because everyone that was in your schedule is now bumped over.
Right.
And so, yes, you'll be diagnosing, but it will also take a little bit of time for you to kind of get up to the full schedule that you want to be at once.
Absolutely.
So I would say let's get the new bodies in and let's start marketing this practice sooner rather than later.
Right.
Now,
Yeah.
now I gave you kudos on the appointing ahead. And I'm going to say in the area of the new patients, this would be an area that you would be focusing on going forward. Is the existing patients tend to be appointed ahead at a high ratio, but the newer patients, now we have to focus on making sure we are retaining those bodies. Okay.
Right. Okay.
So that's another reason why we want to get going with this marketing, because definitely that will start impacting the schedule as you move forward, and then you making sure that everybody is scheduled ahead in the future. That would be kind of the first thing on my list. Is let's do the same great work we're doing with the existing patients, making sure that nobody leaves without their next appointment scheduled. Let's do it at that same high level with the new patients as well.
Right.
Do you feel like you've been able to pinpoint a difference there? Is there a difference with the new patients
compared to existing?
Yep.
Yes, for sure. I definitely have quite a bit of people who come in for a toothache or something like that come one time, and then I talk to them about scheduling a complete exam and a cleaning and everything like that. And that has been a little bit more challenging than the continuation of care for existing patients, for sure.
Mm-hmm. So if you were to kind of walk backwards and think about all the steps that go into getting a new patient to schedule in the future, or to say yes to that recommendation after a toothache, are you kind of thinking about those steps, and is there a breakdown in your opinion in one of the areas? Is it in the delivery of the message? Is it in the building value of it? Is it in the sense of urgency? Is it in that handoff to the front that is a little different for new patients than it is existing? What have you been able to pinpoint, if anything?
I haven't necessarily pinpointed anything. I would say it would probably be from my delivery on things, because everything else has been pretty consistent about it. And I would definitely say that it would probably more than likely be on my end rather than necessarily the front desk or anything like that, just because I definitely do bring it up with them. And say we're focused on one area, if I see something else in the mouth, in there that I see on the x-ray whenever we take it for a limited exam or something along those lines, I definitely bring it up to them and try to express urgency. But I have definitely seen a lack of patients following up and actually coming back for a full exam for sure.
Mm-hmm. So if I just look at that area again, I'm kind of shifting things and giving you some recommendations off the bat, but I think it's a good time right now in our conversation to look at the area of the new patient appointment rate and the new patient case acceptance rate.
Right.
You have a higher case acceptance ratio with existing patients.
Right.
And that's not atypical, except that if you're the one seeing the new patients currently, you don't have a hygienist and you're the one spending an hour with them. I would imagine that case acceptance ratio would be a little on the higher side, right? Which is why I'm kind of saying, okay, let's walk backwards and think about all the things that go into getting a new patient to convert to an existing patient in the practice, to want to be a patient long term. So again, I'm kind of looking at racking your brain in terms of what you can easily pinpoint. It sounds like you said, okay, when I am communicating, maybe value isn't there when you're communicating that to a patient. Exactly. Are you taking care of this emergency and not saying something like, hey, Mrs. Jones, let's make sure this doesn't happen on the other teeth. I am concerned about other areas. I want to see you back.
I use pretty much that exact line whenever I talk to them and everything. And I don't know exactly where it's falling through, but I can definitely tell that there's a big difference between, reiterating the same thing. I know that they're not scheduling like everybody else has been scheduling, coming back and seeing me anyways. I just don't know where the breakdown is necessarily occurring, because I've had some that, they say yes to me and then maybe it falls apart at the front desk. And maybe it's just, it'd be better to have them go ahead and schedule in the op while I'm with them rather than trying to walk in and do the handoff at the front desk. I'm not exactly sure where the breakdown is occurring at the moment anyways.
So you have a part-time assistant currently, right? And
yes.
Are you seeing new patients on your own, or do you typically have your assistant there with you on
both ways, just whenever there's time in the schedule to see a new patient?
I would make sure it happens in the back. Have a conversation, build value for it, turn around, get it scheduled. Have your assistant do that. Have the person up front, come maybe to the back to do it. I would say something is happening in the translation, and right now you don't have enough bodies to hand off to. I mean, maybe she's busy at the front, and so this conversation isn't a quick one like an existing patient. Like, okay, let's get you back, and they know the routine. Exactly. This is taking a little bit longer with a new patient, so I would say we need a body. And maybe having it done in the back without the distraction of the phone and the front door, where, a new patient can easily scoot out and say, yes, okay, great, just give me a call.
Right. And I definitely think that'd be something to for sure try, because whenever the assistant is there, she definitely brings it up with helping and everything like that and trying to get them scheduled before they ever leave. So I'd have to look and see which patients are not scheduling to see if it's days where it's just me by myself compared to days where it's with the assistant anyways.
Tracking, I think, is going to become, an important thing for you in terms of where you see that next step, how you see that happening. And then that will help you to kind of put some thought together on what the trend is there. What are you seeing as a trend? And then you can kind of course correct as you go forward. Right. I'd love to see you continuing to use dental intel, because I think that's definitely going to help you there with the tracking. Where did this new patient come from? Like, when I look at that, it's not consistent in terms of tracking that. So I would say that'll help you with some determinations as well.
Yeah, we just started with the tracking of new patients this month also, trying to at least keep a manual tab just in an Excel sheet, asking patients whenever they come in for a new patient where they heard about us first anyways.
What's the software that you have in the office?
We're using Dentrix.
Okay. So I don't think you need any manual spreadsheets, to be honest. I think you can just enter that in Dentrix and pull a nice report out of Dentrix. And then continuing with Dental Intel, just pull that information out of Dental Intel pretty easily, so that you don't have to kind of recreate anything on a separate spreadsheet, and then things get lost sometimes or forgotten because we just don't have enough time to put it in 3 different places, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm new to Dentrix, so it's all been a learning experience the past 4 months. So figuring out as I go along. So there's definitely things that I'm not super familiar with, anyways.
Of course. Okay, awesome. So we've already kind of started to get into some of the weeds here, but there's much more to talk about for sure on the how-tos and on the areas of, what are your next steps. Before we get to our next week's episode and kind of pick up where we left off, talk to us about more of the long-term vision. So, by a specific date, you want to double the practice. And what date range? Let's talk about that first. What date range do you want to make sure that you've hit that goal and celebrating?
I like to see it done by the end of next year. So 2022.
So by the end of 2022, you want to double the practice's revenue. And what's the longer term vision here?
That is kind of still up in the air as far as what I'm looking at. I don't know if I want to do the single doctor practice style, or I know I only have 4 ops right now, but whenever I bought the practice, I bought the lot adjacent to the practice also to be able to expand into if I see the need for it in the future. So I'm kind of keeping it up in the air as far as which way I want to go. I'd like to get to be a busy solo doctor first and kind of seeing how I like that practice model and just go from there is what is a long-term vision of it anyways.
Okay. What do you feel would be the most helpful for you? I'm looking for a turnkey approach here that we would be discussing on next week's episode that could help you just kind of turn around and use in your practice. What do you think would be the most beneficial for you to know at this point in time?
I guess what would be the most helpful would be kind of knowing once I get the staff into place, what the best thing to do is how to optimize my staff, because I find a lot of times I don't have the help that I need right now to get the practice to where it needs to be. So I guess hiring the correct people and put them in the correct role so that they can efficiently do all the tasks that are needed at the office, and in the same process taking it a little bit off of myself, because right now I feel like I'm doing a little bit more than what I might typically have to do with a little bit larger office with a little bit larger staff anyways.
Yeah, the doctor dependency is high in every sense of the word here, right?
Yeah, exactly.
From the producer and the assistant and everything else. So on days where you don't have that part-time assistant, are all you do hygiene exams during that time?
If there's a limited exam that comes in, then I'll do that. But typically I'm not able to start treatment the same day, which I don't like very much. But that's kind of the situation that I'm in right now.
Okay. All right. Well, I am looking forward to next week's episode so we can talk about how we can make some changes here that are drastically going to impact things in a very positive way.
All right. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And we'll be back with next week's episode of Practice Underwater and Brandon. Thanks so much.
Okay, I hope you guys enjoyed part 1 with Brandon and Suzanne. We had a lot to digest there. Alex, initial thoughts, where you'd like to start?
Well, like we talked about in the intro, I think mindset is a big thing here, because whenever you have an unforeseen circumstance pop up, which when you buy a smaller practice, you have your sole hygienist quit abruptly, and then you're faced with having months worth of hygiene on the books, then you just have to buckle down and do it. Larger issue at play here for me was the fact that Brandon was very upfront about saying that he had an extremely narrow search radius for this practice. This is a great point to bring up, because whenever you have a narrow search radius, you're sometimes resigned to either buying a less than stellar practice that you wouldn't buy unless, if you had a larger search radius, then you could buy a great practice. But when you have to live a certain place to be near family or whatever circumstance there is, sometimes you have to live with that. Sometimes you may want to do a startup, but Brandon wanted to be in this neck of the woods, and I think he's making lemonade out of the lemons that he was dealt. Is it ideal to be doing your own hygiene 4 months into a transition? No, but I think you see glimmers of him having a very resolute mindset throughout all the difficulties.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. It's tough because, like, if we're just talking strictly, how do you find the best practice that most aligns with your vision? A wider search radius gives you, more likely to find that practice. And that's not always the case for the listeners. For someone who's getting ownership, they might have familial constraints that they have to be in a certain area, or they've already bought a house, or whatever the reason may be. That I think, we have trained our listeners so much over the years of that acquisitions are the way. I honestly think with a smaller search radius, if these are the types of practices that are only coming up and you've looked for a while and you feel confident that you've, utilized all the ways we talk about to find a practice, I like startups in this type of environment. Not just also to the point that he's getting a lot of new patients now without marketing. So, I mean, I think my big takeaway with as far as his mindset is, yeah, he has a super strong mindset. He's very open to coaching. I think he needs to start shifting his mind into the fact that this is more of a startup in an acquisition form. Just because he needs to have that growth to get to that 1 million he's talking about.
Right. It is a startup masquerading as an acquisition because he has a decent patient base. He has some cash flow going for him. He has the reputation of the seller to leverage in his favor. But yeah, it's going to definitely be a heavy lift to get to the 1 million mark. He can do it. He has a lofty goal. Suzanne did an excellent job at pressing Brandon for, like, what do you have to do to get to that 1 million? Because everyone wants the $1 million practice, but not enough people want to do what's necessary to get there. And so he had some pretty good answers for what needs to happen. Suzanne, I loved how she pointed out that, hey, even though his back's against the wall and he's not cash flowing the way he wants to, there are still some wins to celebrate. There's still some things that have gone well in the first several months. Chiefly, hygiene reappointment is strong. Patients seem to be receptive to Brandon. He's doing a lot of the things well at the outset to not shoot himself in the foot. But the fact remains, he bought a practice that historically was doing $500,000 in revenue, and now it's taking a bit of a dip, on pace for closer to like 440, 450. So getting that initial hygienist in there to open up that second column to free him up to actually do dentistry is going to be the big way to open the floodgates for him.
Yeah, it's honestly kind of incredible that he's so close to the seller's production when it sounds like most of his days are spent spinning the Cabochon. So credit to Brandon for that. And I loved how Suzanne pointed out to him that, if that hygienist is starting in July, whenever her license is ready, maybe in August, to start marketing now in June, to start with that influx of calls that he will get. And again, I also loved how he pushed him into looking for someone else at the front, so that when the main front is in the treatment presentation or doing other tasks in the office, that phone doesn't just ring through. Nothing peeves me more than a missed phone call. Man, that just keeps me up at night.
No, it's really inexcusable, and I know we'll get into this more in part 2 with Suzanne diving more into the how to get him from doing 450K to $1 million, but there's so much meat left on the bone as far as that case acceptance piece. And so much of that is doctor driven, but a lot of it is, front office team driven too, being adequately staffed up front to be able to devote time to giving a solid treatment plan presentation, to break down the financial arrangements without being rushed to have to go sprint back to the phone when it rings. There's so much opportunity here. And I think that there's a lot of doctor dependency that seems to be at play here, obviously, because there's some days where Brandon is one of only 2 people in the building when he's
the only provider, so right, it's not dependent on anyone else.
Right. And so there's days where there's no assistant. So he's doing hygiene, no assistant, front office is there. And it's the definition of lean and mean. Sometimes that type of arrangement, the low overhead, the keeping things small, that gets a lot of, pats on the back from people in the industry. And in shared practices, we call that industry standard of being so proud of having 18% staff overhead. But what if you had, I don't know, 25 or 26% staff overhead, but you weren't missing phone calls and you were following up on treatment? There's so much cutting off your nose to spite your face that happens in our industry, that I think it causes people to default to like, oh, well, I'm short staffed, but at least my staff overhead's low. Doesn't matter. It's the denominator, not the numerator, that matters.
Yeah, he would be wise to maybe not talk to his accountant for a few months if he's actually trying to double the practice in 18 months, because he really needs to be one by one staffed at the size of the office that will get him to 1 million. He's not going to get to 1 million with 3 staff members, one of them part-time. He's not going to get to 1 million doing his own hygiene. And he knows all this. And I think Suzanne does a really good job of, pointing out some things that he sees, but also asking Brandon, what are the actions that are going to get you there? And what order do we do these? And that's the best thing for me as a coach, is to see, what is realized in someone's mind and now is put into action, and with accountability, with dates. And that's just everything we're looking for right there.
Right. And it's really hard, to your point, like how admirable it is that Brandon has more or less replicated what the seller was doing. He's doing a phenomenal job just keeping the ship afloat, but that's what he's doing. Like, he's treading water. He can't, it's really, I hate to say the word impossible, but it's really impossible to grow the practice substantially in the absence of having a full-time hygienist. Like, once he gets that, then, as Suzanne alluded to, you basically double the number of patients that are seen per day. You open up the capacity. They've already added the extra day a week dedicated solely to getting treatment done, because the seller was doing this production in 3 days a week. Brandon has 4 days now. And you get that hygienist in there, and that's really the key element. In part 2, Suzanne gets into a really great nitty-gritty discussion about the sequence of adding team members, like what order to do that in. And I think that's so key, is not being afraid to add team members, and B, making sure that you're being intuitive about doing it in the right order.
Totally agree. And I want to touch on the question of, like, back before he bought this practice, he's looking at a 4-op practice, which he says has room to grow as far as capacity wise, doing about 500,000. Like, that's a lot of what's out there when people are looking for practice. So, like, what do they do? If this doesn't ultimately fit his vision, do they keep looking? Do they consider startups? It's a very tough position to be looking for dental practice right now.
It's a complex market. And especially when it all goes back to the search radius for me, because conventional wisdom says, buy something with cash flow. Because when you're buying a practice, you're buying the good, the bad, and the ugly of that existing practice. You're buying the great things about it, and you're buying the ugly underbelly of it too. And Brandon discovered the ugly provider-dependent underbelly that this practice had. And so when you're faced with either being an associate or working at community health or working at some other type of clinic or buying an office, sometimes it's better to just tread water as an associate until you find something adequate. Something that we're going to be doing a webinar on coming up in June here at Shared Practices. George is going to be talking about how we evaluate practices, how we do our due diligence, what we look at, what we would recommend that an educated buyer focus on to really make sure that they don't set themselves up for a difficult first couple of years into ownership. So cash flow, number one, like you want to be able to make enough money to make it worth being an owner. I have a friend of mine right now that is struggling with being an owner because everyone says it's better to be an owner. And in a lot of cases it is. But if you're making half of what you made as an associate as an owner, and then you tackle on all the HR, all the managerial
all the stress
stuff
that comes with it.
Yeah. Like you want to at least be making more. Like that's a negative EBITDA business if you are making less than you were as an associate. So, it's not all sunshine and rainbows, but you can alleviate a lot of problems on the front end by being smart about your due diligence.
100%. And I highly encourage people to to go to that webinar. That sounds amazing. June 21st, I believe, the webinar, Monday night. Excuse me if I have that date wrong. It's whatever the Monday is that week. I mean, my two big things I come to when thinking about practice ownership, and is this the right practice for me? To simplify it, is the income there that I want to make, both right off the bat and the potential in the future, and does it fit my lifestyle? Going back to even to the solo versus group, does this have the capacity for me to be a somewhat offsite owner? How many days do I want to work? And are the bones there for that? And in Brandon's case, I don't know if he got into too much with Suzanne in this part about, where he sees his career 5-10 years. But at least in this case, he does have, he did buy the adjacent lot, he said. So he does have that capacity to build, in the future if needed. He definitely, it's an undertaking to do what he wants to do. To make this $1 million practice in 18 months is not, I wouldn't call it, I wouldn't call it easy. There are more straightforward ways to get more straightforward practices to take from 500 to $1 million than this one. But it sounds like he's got the mindset that can get him there.
He can absolutely do it. And if he were one of these people that were coming on Practice Underwater, being confrontational, questioning the numbers, not being coachable, then I'd say, ooh, there's not a snowball's chance of that happening. But because Brandon displays that coachability, and because he honestly self-diagnoses a lot of the issues even before Suzanne does, like Suzanne gets into case acceptance, like how comfortable are you creating urgency with your patients? How easy is it for you to have those difficult conversations? And he self-diagnoses fairly and honestly, like, hey, I could improve here because my previous associate experience did not really prepare me for private practice, about talking to people about asymptomatic teeth, for example. So, there's a lot that plays into it, but I think in Brandon's case, if he continues nose to the grindstone, one foot in front of the other, making the right moves in the right order, if anybody can do it, he can.
Yeah, totally agree. All right, perfect. Well, we'll leave it there. In part 2 next week, Suzanne gets in a lot of the action items and the more nitty gritty on how he might get to this practice to $1 million. So please tune in then, and we'll see everyone next week.